Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 125 with Eigil Bryld, DP of The Holdovers. Enjoy! One thing I do normally ask, I feel like I wanted to change this for this season, but I haven't. But I've been asking people, what have you been watching? I know we were saying it's only been 6 months since we last spoke, but I assume something has piqued your interest since then.
I know. I mean, I saw went to Camera Marsh and I saw Poor Things. I mean, what a trip! But I'm so glad I saw it on a big screen. I mean, it's just mind blowing, and it's one of those. It feels so precious in a way that I didn't want to overthink it afterwards. So I want to go and see it again, and then maybe sort of try and figure out. But I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was so happy that the people out there crazy enough to sort of venture into that sort of crazy landscape, and obviously it's there's a lot of layers to it and a lot of depth and textures, and so I thought that was really really encouraging. And then what else? I mean, I sometimes struggle with what's this year and what's last year. And what have I seen? God. Well, I watched that thing, but that was sort of a vacation thing. The thing on Netflix, Leaving Everything Behind.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Thing, which was entertaining, interesting. I mean, I like that sort of apocalyptic sort of end of the world.
Yeah.
It makes me feel strangely comforted.
Me too. I think it has, if I had to guess, at least this is the way I feel. It's like anytime you see a movie that's about, now time sort of, but is so far removed, the stresses of today go away, even if what you're watching is theoretically more stressful,
I guess it's sort of the simple life. If the world ends and you just have to survive and whatever, it's a strange world when that seems like the easy way.
Right. Did you pick up? Were you able to see Saltburn at all?
I haven't seen Saltburn yet, but
that's a trip. But
it's one. I actually had it on the streamer, but I want to see it on the big screen as well. I know a lot of the people who worked on it, and so that's one I want to see. And Linus's work looks mental as well. It looks it's sort of nightmare of color and light. It looks insane.
No, it's a great. People are over exaggerating the sort of extremeness of it. There's only 2 parts that are even a little but that's it. It's a gorgeous looking film. The weird part is it's continuing a trend that I guess technically you were a part of, where everyone's doing these near square, kind of 4x3, 166, 133 frames. And like the younger kids are doing it, I think, just to be different. But it is interesting that it's very quickly found its way into cinemas. Same thing with Poor Things.
Going back, I always liked that sort of lots of headroom and because obviously the more square you are in a way. I mean, like the movie Ida that came out a few years ago by that's another film I'm really looking forward to, is the Jonathan Glazer movie. But with all that extreme headroom, and if you go really square, then you can really sort of play with headroom in a different way, which I always found sort of dreamy, and obviously it gets more architectural and there's sort of a poetry to it, but you have to be bold to pull it off in movies. But I guess that door has been kicked down now, and then I don't know if it could be Instagram as well, because obviously we're getting used to sort of the very square, but overall, that's one of the good things about streaming, is that the whole sort of format thing has really been, that door has been kicked down. I'm old enough to remember shooting movies, and you had to frame, we had all these different frame lines, and because it had to be cropped for every possible, even the sort of headroom, because they would extract from within if you shot 2:3:5, say, or whatever. But all that is, you can shoot 2:1, you can shoot 1:1, you can. I think that's really that's sort of that. Yeah, that's I think that's a good thing for sure, because because even though to most people it seems like, yeah, you know, who cares? It really does sort of have a sort of subtle. I mean, like on the Holdovers, there's a little bit of a story with that, because obviously that movie was made to look like it was, you know, not like if we were pretending to be in the 70s, but we wanted to make it so it would actually look like it was, you know, a film that somebody found in a can on somebody's shelf in the garage or whatever. So we went to great effort in so many different ways of sort of recreating that. But one of the places, because all the films of that era, in America, they would have been 185, which was the standard sort of Academy, I guess, format. But we like the idea of 166 just because it's a little more intimate for portraits or whatever. And also it obviously has a little bit of sort of connection with 16 mil, because there would have been, and also European sort of art house. So it's sort of and obviously it's a subtle little thing, but I think it's gonna, yeah, I think it worked just sort of for composing and executing that movie, but I also think to the more sort of connoisseur, whatever, the movie lovers, even if they don't pick up on it, it's still gonna sort of give some sort of, yeah, a little echo somewhere in the back lines.
I'm just asking because I don't know. For European cinema, did they not have like Super 35 or like 2-perf or 3-perf gates? Is that why everything was so tall? Because I know we did it because it was cheaper, but you still got that kind of widescreen cool look. But I know it was hard to find those mechanisms at one point.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously there was the whole Super 35. I mean, I used to know all this stuff, but obviously it had to do with sort of film not having to have sound on it, so you could use the wider image.
Right.
Then there was the sort of the nuisance of shooting anamorphic lenses because you had to have such a deep stop, so it was sort of associated with big productions and obviously the limited range of those lenses. So then the whole Super 35 or the sort of the, wasn't it called Super 35 when you sort of just letterboxed it, and then but I think that was the idea that then people started thinking, why am I wasting all this negative now? So maybe we should make just a 2-perf camera and only just expose the part that we actually, rather than wasting the whole image up and down. And obviously the roll could run longer, whatever. But I think in Europe it was, I think there was more sort of 16 mil
sure,
in being shot for independent movies and obviously just for budgetary reasons, I assume. But also it's a good, I mean, I used to shoot a lot of 16 mil and I love those cameras because you can really shoot completely guerrilla style. Because I remember in the 80s or whatever, when everybody had the big camcorders, the big fancy VHS camcorders. Right. Yeah. I was shooting this documentary in Russia and we were shooting on an Arton, a tiny little Super 16 camera. And whenever I pulled it out, people would just be laughing and like, oh, you have a silly toy camera, look at my big VHS camera.
Right.
But perfect because it was so, you could literally have it under your coat and you could just, pull it out and it was a beautiful camera. Yeah, I missed the old 16. But obviously 16 has a little bit of it. We tested it actually for the Holdovers because we really like the idea, because one of the problems nowadays is obviously grain. Very hard to get grain on modern film stocks because modern film stocks are really
basically they're like digital.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, that's why obviously what they're designed for. I mean, that's the whole contrast ratio is designed for telecine, digital transfer, the lack of grain. So we thought, well, if we shoot 16, and we actually did test it out. It didn't quite feel right. It felt a little too sort of
cramped.
Yeah, exactly. But we did like the grain. But Kodak, because we shot this at the end of the pandemic when there was all the sort of supply chain issues, and they literally said to us, we can't deliver on a movie on 16. So maybe they're trying to strong arm us into 35 or whatever. But it felt like I was like, I couldn't believe it, but I was looking around and I know other people had the same issue. But I guess on the positive side is I think a lot more people are shooting 16 because it is a beautiful format, obviously with the contrast and the colors and yeah, I'd love to do something on 16 at some point.
It's funny because I heard you in a different interview mention, and this is something I've brought up a lot to like newer filmmakers or like students, is how for the longest, I mentioned it on this podcast too, where like for the longest time it was like, we need sharper glass, we need like, you know, the film looks like shit if you don't put really good, you got to shoot at a T4. And now people are like, I want a K35 wide open because the digital sensor is just too good.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny because obviously in the 70s they hated grain. I mean, everybody was like, it was the, you know, nobody wanted grain, and now we are all trying to put grain back into the images, which is I read this one of my favorite sort of Masters of Light, the old sort of the 70s book with all the 70s masters. There it is, exactly.
I did see you mention it in a different article, so I grabbed it just to be like, ah.
There's a great article in there by T. Chapman, or an interview with him, where he's talking about The Last Detail, the Hal Ashby movie with John Nicholson, and which is a brilliant movie. I remember seeing it as a kid as well. And it was his first movie as a DP. He'd obviously been an operator for Gordon Willis or whatever, done Taxi Driver, and so he was very, very well established. But he was really frustrated with they were shooting, and they kept getting the rushes back from this shitty lab somewhere on the East Coast, and he was really not.
Oh no.
I think maybe halfway into the movie or whatever, it was like, oh, enough is, you know, we have to change lab, and big sort of, obviously didn't have tons of money, so they were like, okay, we're going to have to send it, I think they sent it to the West Coast then or whatever, and they started sending it back there, and it came back, and it was like, beautiful, pristine, you know, no, and then he actually thought, oh, damn, I made a mistake here. I actually like the sort of the crummy looking, that actually suited the movie better. It got too good. So that's something, because I obviously read that sort of interview with him for this one as well, and just I like that sort of. I tried to take some of that into the Holdovers as well, remembering this is not about sort of making it sort of just pursuing this sort of endless sort of photographic perfection or whatever, which is obviously always a balance, because we have our craft as well, and we want to, you know, obviously master it, but part of that obviously is not always that it's more complicated than just being serving your own vanity or whatever.
So this while we're doing this interview, the episode hasn't come out yet, but when people are listening to it, we'll have. I interviewed Hoyte. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned in that interview how, and it really stuck with me because it gave me confidence to stop worrying about being good enough, in the sense that like a feeling like I'm constantly being judged. And that is, he was saying like one thing that frustrates him is watching a movie and feeling the cinematographer's OCD. You know, like you just micromanaging every little piece of the thing and trying to make it so that it's like aesthetically the most perfect, you know, by the letter golden ratio frame ever. He's like, fuck it, center punch it, use one light, turn, you know, whatever, who cares? It doesn't need to be, it needs to be something I've mentioned a million times. It needs to be emotionally correct. Technically correct is nice, but not a requirement necessarily.
No, I agree, and I think he's really a master of that. I mean, he has there's so much confidence in his work in that sense, because he really has sort of on whatever he does, there's a very very clear handle on it, and that's the way he does it, and he just pursues it. And because obviously sometimes you get into trouble, and then like maybe you can't see their eyes or whatever, where all the sort of the little things that we know that's really important. You know, you have to see their eyes, and it's the cast or whatever. But I think he really sort of he's one of those ones who has that sort of I don't have his confidence, but I certainly applaud him. I'm happy that there's people like him. But But I think also it's a part of I mean, obviously shooting on film as well sort of helps a little bit, because one of the problems I think with digital is that you sort of end up just over-examining your images, and one of the things that I was actually very conscious about it on the Holdovers was that because we try and make everything seamless as well. It's almost like, like making the cut seamless almost. That the whole thing, we should sort of taken one thing away that I really love in movies, which is the cut, where you sort of have a definite cut from one thing to the other, and I actually think cuts should be jarring as well. Certainly at times, everything shouldn't just be sort of evened out and smoothed out or whatever. So I try and sort of, because I have the same as you, I always sort of look at myself from the outside and I think, is this am I fucking up or whatever? And but then so I try and find all these convoluted ways of figuring out how not to sort of look at myself and like on the Holdovers, I would operate all the time, which is one thing I do, because then as I want to get away from the sort of the perfect monitor and the perfect viewing condition or whatever, and force myself to think, well, this is about ideas and intentions and much more than about. I often think it's not really, you can use your eye too much in a way. I mean, obviously, it's more sort of it's the thinking. If you like just by your eye, then you're just going to end up sort of just making it all smooth and hollow potentially. But if you use your mind and really insist on it and then follow through on it, then I think that's a much more sort of it tells much better stories that way, I think, and you feel it. I mean, I read this article in the New York Times today about AI and the sort of what people are worried about AI making visual art and obviously movies as well and songs or whatever. But the whole point of that article was that that's not really the worry. The worry is that we're becoming too much like AI, because if we are threatened by the sort of where AI reproduces stuff that's already done and just with that sort of perfection that AI can do, then that's not what we should be doing. We should be doing, something that has that's new and has sort of comes out of the cracks or whatever. Not sort of so. Don't worry about AI in taking us over. Worry about us becoming AI ourselves.
Yeah,
I love.
Well, and it kind of speaks to what you're saying about like movies like Poor Things coming out, which I think is I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen a lot of positive reaction towards it. Saltburn, certainly the Holdovers, which I haven't tooted your horn yet, but fucking top 3 movies of the year for me by far. But I think it's that reaction to that over manicured. I hesitate to say superhero films, but that tends to be the films that are over manicured. I think people want to see something that is more human, both in storytelling, but also in experience, and sometimes that isn't what you guys did, which it certainly is. Sometimes it is kind of weird, wide angle nonsense, like in Poor Things.
I mean, certainly in Poor Things, I mean, obviously they put a lot of thought into it, but, and there's a lot of sort of brain power, whatever, but they must have also just unleashed their stomachs at where it's just like, there's no way that everything was planned out. I mean, there's certainly an element of sort of performance and sort of just sort of feeling the moment and sort of being there and actually experience and sort of, which I think is the beauty of filmmaking is when you can actually, when one thing, obviously you have to prepare. The more you prepare yourself, the more liberated you are when you're actually there. And obviously sometimes you have to lock things down just to sort of know which direction to look in or whatever. But it's really when you're there that you can sort of make it sort of something that's not sort of preconceived. Because the trouble is, at least for me, if I just use my mind or whatever, then I can come up with ideas or whatever. But it's really unsaid where you see something and this is unique and something new, or it's completely its own thing. it's not like, oh, it's just like this or just like that or whatever. It sort of has to become its own thing, which is yeah.
Yeah. Well, it kind of speaks to, I think you had mentioned it being in Masters of Light, but I know you had mentioned shooting the Holdovers that you were trying to think of like approaching it as if you shot it in the 70s and not using the tools of the 70s, but using the approach of it. And I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on what you mean by that, because I think it is something that maybe a lot of us learned prior to the digital age, but then having all these tools that make the jobs easier, you kind of lose that experimentation and that sort of freedom when it comes to just having what you have and having to work with it.
I mean, because my initial thought was when I read the script and we talked about, well, we want to make this movie, that seemed like it was made back then, and I thought, well, we'll have to recreate all the sort of conditions that so I'm thinking about all the conditions and like obviously cameras and film stock and lighting, and I started researching how could I find arc lights anywhere.
Kill some people.
Yeah, so really, I found that there was a place, I think somewhere in the Midwest or whatever, that did like big sort of promotional searchlights that which are basically an arc light but I mean, obviously that would have been crazy because I mean, they explode and you need special generator. It would have been so expensive but the more I sort of got into it and I was like, oh, maybe I should call Kodak and see if I can get them to make some of the old film stock and it got to be all this, but I also felt like I was sort of making the room smaller and smaller around me in a way. It just became this sort of frustrating thing, and then, but then I can't remember, but then I started thinking, well, what is it that I like about the 70s movie? And because in the 70s, obviously, in the late 60s, people kicked the door down and escaped from the studios, and then they started shooting movies in the street, and they shot stories about strange people, and it was just that sort of, it was sort of throwing all the rules away, and things didn't have to look a particular way or whatever. And then I thought, well, really the mindset is that, and they were shooting, some people shoot 16, and then I thought, well, that's really what sort of made that all those amazing movies, and I thought, well, so really, if maybe I should bring that mindset to this day rather than trying to sort of send myself back to the 70s, when 70, where I wasn't even born, by the way. Then I'll bring that mindset here. And I was thinking, well, if it was 1970 and with this kind of movie that we had with this kind of budget, I was like, well, I think I would shoot digital. I think I would use LED lights. I think I would sort of make it work, sort of bring that sort of making it not about the whole sort of machine or whatever, but really making it more about what we're photographing, and then sort of opening up my mind rather than sort of restricting it by all these sort of dogmas and which half of them were sort of impossible anyways, and would have been sort of window dressing, and I think that was really sort of a big sort of eye-opener for me to think about it in that sense. It was very liberating. And I was thinking, well, this is really sort of, this is where my focus should be. And then, but then, then we did test all sorts of different things. And but look with the approach of what's really gonna sort of, what's gonna sort of help us, what's gonna sort of make it, also, what's going to get us through the day? We had a very, we didn't have a lot of money, and we had a fairly restricted amount of days, and we had tons of location. Everything is shot on location.
Right.
So, and Alexander is amazing as well, because I mean, he loves that kind of movie making where you really sort of, you get your hands sort of down and dirty, and you sort of get in with it, and you have to make it work, and it has to be pleasurable. And obviously, you don't want to spend too much time sort of traveling and just for one little insignificant. A lot of making a film is obviously trying to balance things out, because you could, I mean, I would dread having an unlimited budget, because I think I would end up wasting so much time on things that didn't really matter. which obviously happens in some movies, but
Right.
but this is really sort of being super economical with the and I think that translates into the whole movie in a way that also the mentality of the 70s where you would reuse things like Hunnam in the, if he had too much belt, I'm sure he would cut some of it off and use it as a book separator or whatever. It's just sort of the super economical mentality which I like. Yeah, sort of guerrilla filmmaking.
Yeah. I noticed in the film, which I saw it in theaters, but it was probably it was whenever I texted you. It was like, so I pretty much left the theater. When your name came up, I didn't know you had shot it. Your name came up on the thing, and I just went, "That's my friend," and then I immediately DM'd you. So my memory isn't super sharp on it, but the lighting setups felt so incredibly natural. Like everything felt so just window lit, or like you were just using the lights inside the school or the bar or whatever. Did that kind of documentary guerrilla approach make its way into the lighting, or were you actually finessing it in such a way where it just looked that good?
I mean, it was definitely the approach because we also have to remember, because obviously we always think about, I mean, that's in Masters of Light. I think it's Roman Oisman who shot, or Roisman, who did the French Connection, and it was so hailed for his style, and it was just, that was shot on 16, I think, and everybody was like, oh, it's the most amazing available light, and it made him so upset, and he showed all these sort of, because they lit like the fuck out of that,
Right.
all the time. But back in the day, obviously, because film was so contrasty or whatever, so you really had to. I mean, you could obviously shoot available light, but then it would take a long time to find the right location that would give you the conditions. But I think one of the things about, I mean, what we tried to do on the Holdovers was really just sort of the basic stuff, which is sometimes sort of not really honored the way it should be, but it's about shooting things at the right time of the day, really spending time on locations and figuring out what is this location really. It's really honoring, like one of the scenes that really that we struggle a lot with is when they're having sort of their dinners in the big mess hall, and they're all on their own, because it's like you couldn't really put a light in there. We like, why would there all of a sudden be a light on the table? And it's something that would, that we all do. We like in a bar, a restaurant, and then let's put a light on the table, because that obviously works for a lot of things, because it centers the attention and it creates this little bubble for people. So it's but I was very sort of adamant that not to sort of just serve myself. It really had to, I was thinking, we're photographing the rooms, and then basically we're doing portraits of people in environments, but not sort of where they're part of the environment, rather than just sort of being almost sort of superimposed and treated sort of too special. They had to sit, sort of be part of the environment, and that obviously sort of required us to it takes a while to just, because obviously it doesn't mean you could just show up and then flick the lights on or whatever, or
Right.
or just, I mean, obviously for daytime as well, you have to be mindful of weather continuity to a certain degree. I wasn't too worried about continuity on this, to be honest. I actually wanted to, we ended up because obviously we had the luxury of digital grading, so we did sort of even out more stuff than I really wanted to, because in the beginning I was like, we're just going to keep all the inconsistencies, if it's a little down, if the window is really bright and then it's not so bright, I don't care. But
That can get distracting if you let it get too crazy.
no, exactly. And also it doesn't, even if you look at a window from different angles, it's going to look different even to your eye. It's not, and nobody is, I mean, you're not shooting for the police anyway. It's not like you're not going to get arrested, whatever, as long as you, so we really tried to do it sort of as everything is sort of, every take was an individual take to sort of serve a very specific purpose. the lighting sort of, and it was photographing people in spaces, and then the whole prep was sort of figuring out, how do we, when do we do it at the best time, which order do we do things in, and the whole stuff, and that's where I think this movie sort of, someone called the lab my great Joe Gowler, or he's not mine, but he's his, but he's amazing. I work with him a lot, and he's amazing. Somebody called him, and very famous DP, and asked, "Oh, so how'd you get the look of the Holdovers?" And he texted me, and I texted my first AC, Glenn Kaplan, and Glenn Kaplan was just like, he was like, with love, but it was his answer. And I think that's actually really true, because because it does make it a very sort of making a movie in this sort of way is a very collaborative. You need the first AD to understand what you're doing. You need obviously the director to be on board as well and saying, okay, let's do it in that order, and we can be done at noon, because at noon it's all gonna, hell's gonna break loose. So that's cool. Everybody has to sort of be, it becomes collaborative, which goes back to the whole sort of my idea of how movies were made in the 70s as well. It was, and obviously the whole sort of philosophy of the era. So yeah, and that also just made it a sort of immensely sort of pleasurable to do the movie, because it really became like a little sort of circus ensemble, sort of bouncing around all over juices.
That reminds me of not to just keep calling back to other interviews, but I did them recently. When I was talking to Bob Yeoman, he was talking about how Wes Anderson likes to just make it feel like a film, like a student film set. And I thought that was interesting, because like with you operating, Alexander didn't write the script, right?
No, it's David Hemmingson wrote it, and I mean, it was Alexander's idea, because he'd seen this obscure French film that was set in a boarding school, I think from the 30s or whatever. I can't remember what it's called, and he really liked the idea of the sort of the setting and whatnot, and then David had sent him a script for a TV show or whatever, and Alexander was like, "I'm not interested in that, but I like your writing. How about you write this?" And David picked up on it, and then he wrote it, and then I mean, David wrote the script, but Alexander would have been very involved, and I mean, he doesn't start shooting until he doesn't do a lot of movies of it, because it takes time to really sort of be putting the script for the grinder. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, because I saw in a different interview, you're saying that like if the scene called for it, or if maybe the weather was in your favor, or like I remember in the I think you said in the bowling alley, he like rewrote some stuff for the scene to make it work. And I was just thinking, like, with you operating in DP and with the director also sort of quasi rewriting the script as you go, it does make me think that you can move a lot quicker and also have a more unified artistic vision, because there's only two people. I mean, obviously there's more than two people, but there's a smaller group of people making any decisions.
100%. I mean, that's always been pretty much on any movie I do, even if it's a big movie or whatever. But I think the most important, I like to operate, because then you're sort of there and you're not just looking at a monitor where you see, but you can see if something weird happens, or it's just a flag that sort of, or whatever. But I think the most, I always build it up, you operating the camera, and then there's the focus puller, and then there's the dolly grip is like really important person, because it also, and then the director, having the director really close. And I mean, Alexander Payne, he's like here or here. He doesn't look at a monitor. He doesn't even look, we set up the shot together, and he's very super involved in that. But then as soon as it comes to, when it is rolling, it would be his hair coming in front of the lens, and I'll have to pull him out because he's right there. So I know his heart rate and his breathing patterns, but I always, and then obviously the boom operator is part of that, because those are really the people that all have attention and are very super close to the cast as well. And I think it's very important to sort of create that bubble of comfort and trust, and having that shorthanded thing where you can just look at each other from across the room, or you're right next to the person, or you don't have to. It's not like you haven't really discussed that many things at that point. Things become sort of exactly like you described it. It becomes sort of a sort of collective mind.
Yeah. Well, and with one camera too. The actors don't even have to think about multiple angles. It's just like everything gets more. I don't know if insular is the right word, but contained and focused.
100%. Because I did this show for Woody Allen number of years ago, and obviously he does a lot of ad-libbing, and he would say to the actors, I don't care if you can remember your lines, because I can't remember mine either. And he obviously he lets things run or whatever. And I thought, I just done what's it called, the thing, the DC thing. What was it called? With David Fincher, House of Cards.
Oh, DC. I thought you meant like DC Comics. I was like, did you?
No,
comic book show?
Well,
yeah, House of Cards. Yeah,
the real DC comedy.
Yeah.
But and we were obviously shooting 2 cameras all the time, and I thought that worked really well. And I was like, this is brilliant. I'm going to pitch him. We'll shoot 2 cameras. Even if there's an airplane or a bus drives past, the sound's going to be perfect. Everything is, you can cut wherever. And he was like, okay, or whatever. And then didn't hear anything from them for a week or whatever. They're already given me the job. And then the producer called me, and she said, well, he's really embarrassed to tell you, but he just can't get his head around the 2 cameras, because which camera is he then going to act to? And it made me weird. Well, it's so old-fashioned, but actually the way you shoot a Woody Allen movie is that it's always a 2-shot. He's talking to some, so it's at least a 2-shot. So you set the camera up, and you always do it over him. And then the reason why he's always shuffling around, which sort of seems like it's part of his act, but it's also his way of opening up, so he gets more or less into frame. So he's really staging it around that whole camera. And that's obviously a very sort of something he sort of refined, but that goes all the way down to he was in front of the camera. That's why it worked. I don't think it would have worked with a lot of modern actors as well, because I think working with 2 cameras, or more than 2 cameras, multiple cameras, it's all, and even how you do your setups during the day, the most important decision is where you put the camera in the first time, or the first camera you set up, because really, so that even if it's subconsciously or whatever, most actors would sort of start sort of favoring that, or it would have, it's going to start shaping things from the get-go. So, I've worked on more so sort of in the past, but worked with directors who were like, let's just do, do the boring easy shot over here first, or whatever, or let's just do like all this, and then we get
coverage
up. Some sort of coverage or some sort of, and I'm always like, no, that's, it's a terrible mistake. We should do the most important, really put the camera where it matters the most, where it's really like, there's no way, this is where it's really told from. And then, and if you do that, then very often you realize, well, I didn't actually need that other shot, but as soon as you start watering it down, and that goes to the whole, it obviously gives a movie a different sort of sensibility if there is only 1 camera, even though for good, luckily not all actors are like Woody Allen and they sort of play to the camera, but it still becomes, especially if you're in there amongst it does become sort of, a person at the table as well. It does, it is like the crazy uncle or whatever that you don't really want to look in his direction when you're sort of saying, well, it becomes part of it, and so I do feel it sort of it makes a huge difference not having. I know I mean, obviously you could, yeah. Certainly, if you're making a movie that's sort of set in the 70s, because that's how, the kind of movie that we made was, those films that is related to those films would have been made with one camera, and I think that would have been silly. Yeah, it would have been very different had we not done it.
Yeah. Well, and also speaking of actors, that what's the main actor's name? The kid?
Dominique
Dude.
Says,
holy shit, he's too good.
I mean, it's his first movie. I mean, it's his first acting gig.
Can't believe it.
But part of the whole sort of this sort of talk we're having is turning into. I mean, he was actually a student at Deerfield Academy where we shot 80% of the movie and all the stuff that's said. Because Alexander thought, well, why don't we look around? And I mean, they were casting. I think they looked at least 1,000 kids or whatever. And then they sort of came across him, and he just seemed. I mean, he's so sort of. He's obviously now in hindsight, he's so talented. I mean, he's gonna go to places. But back then in the beginning, when it was just a casting tape or whatever, it's like he has an amazing. I mean, he's obviously very.
Got a great face.
He's got such a good face. I mean, he has a face much like Adam Driver or whatever, that you could just sort of photograph in a different angle. You can hit him with any sort of light, and it's just really sort of interesting. He looks like something out of a 70s movies already, but he also looks like something out of a painting from the 1500 or he's something very timeless, a timeless sort of beauty about him. He's not like just he's not a boy band sort of even though he would be great in a boy band as well. I mean, I can't say enough good things about him, but so actually, so when we were shooting, he would sleep in his dorm room. The school was shut down.
Oh, geez.
That's how the whole thing sort of came from the outside. Why go look in Tokyo for this guy? When he could very well be right there under your nose, he was that was such a thrill. Also to see him and obviously because he had a lot of scenes with so many scenes with Paul Giamatti and the way that because Paul he's a very smart man. I mean his dad was I think the head of Harvard for years and years. So he comes out of a heavy academic. He reads like he's read more books than anybody you can imagine, and he's very good obviously with language, and he has a very clear method, and he's a perfect actor really. And but the way those two would sort of bond, and I think Dominic sort of not that he didn't already have it in him, but just to see that sort of relationship sort of unfold in the movie we're making, but also sort of on the behind the scenes was just extraordinary. But a really impressive thing is that the opening of the movie, you bounce around a bit, and then you come up to all the kids in the dorm room when they're packing up. That was shot on the first day of shooting. So the first shot we did was him packing, and then I think the fourth shot or whatever is him poking his head down around, which is really technical because you really have to hit your mark, come out the door and shout at somebody in a close-up like this. That was day one of his whole acting career, which is just sort of mind-blowing because the camera is also like only like this far away, and to have the confidence and just to sort of the ability to be doing that and not sort of just shit in your pants or whatever. I mean, he's gonna do yeah.
Were you guys having to, because I know this happens, the classic example is E.T., but were you guys in pre-production kind of in planning on scheduling the schedule around essentially him because he wasn't experienced? Like, were you thinking like, oh, let's do these certain shots first because those will be, because obviously you're not going to put the most emotional scene first, but I'm sure that wasn't the plan. But was that kind of a consideration, or was it kind of strictly locations and weather?
I mean, number one driving sort of was obviously the weather. So we knew we had to shoot it in obviously from January onwards, which is we had the best chance of snow. And then the second thing that drove it was that we had to shoot it during the school's break, because no school would let us shoot. This was also sort of in pandemic times, so nobody would ever allow us to be around with all the kids. So it had to be in I guess it's the spring break or whatever, that we had to shoot all the school stuff. And then so that drove it. And then obviously, like you say, I mean, we made a great effort to try and shoot it somewhat chronologically, but that so with key scenes, but there was never any sort of I mean, I don't think there was any easy scenes either. I mean, I don't know about Paul, because Paul makes everything seem easy. It's like, you know, give him a free pay dialogue with very saturated language, and it's not like he makes a lot of mistakes or he sort of stumbles his way through it. He makes everything look easy, but so did Dominique. I mean, it's just that it's just that beautiful. I remember when I did in Bruges as well. It was with the relationship between Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, and because obviously they're very different sort of personalities, and Colin is a much looser guy. This is a while ago, but obviously he was a lot. But Brendan Gleeson really had that sort of presence. It was like, okay, we're acting. You know, it's like not that Colin was unprofessional or nothing like that, but just that sort of
a little freer.
Exactly. And just then, but then obviously, like when you put two people together, then this sort of synergy happened. So Paul really did carry obviously a lot of that, just because of his experience and his just sort of his immense generosity.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up In Bruges, because I kind of wanted to touch on what the difference was shooting a movie on film. That movie didn't have a very large budget either, right? That was
no.
Yeah. So what has changed between, you know, shooting a film on locations with known actors in 2008 versus now? Like, has the approach changed at all? Have you learned it? Of course, you've learned something between then and now, but you know, how has your approach to shooting changed, and how has maybe things gotten easier or harder?
Well, I think I'm more worried about not so much having, you know, I'm sure I've learned things, but I'm also sometimes worried of unlearned things, because
sure.
But I actually think the biggest sort of technological sort of difference between then and now in terms of what we work with is the lighting equipment, because and I think we tend to forget how complicated it is to shoot even with a redhead, because you don't dim it. I mean, you put a scrim in, and you know it's super hot, and you have to get up there, or you can dim it a little bit and make it warmer. You put a gel on, or you put it, if you want one more diffusion. I mean, it was just it was difficult, you know. Gelling an HMI at night on a crane up high in the wind, you don't really want to gel it because it's going to blow off, and then all of a sudden your whole color palette is out the window.
Right.
It's I think all of that is really sort of the main, but then it depends on how you treat it, because on something like the Holdovers, I did sort of had the mindset of it being like film. Like I said to Alexander, I said earlier on, I said, because we were testing all these different things, and then we realized that if we shot 35, we would then have to degrain it in order to add our own grain. And at that point, I was like, okay, so we're going to shoot in film and then make it look digital to make it look film again. And then I thought that just seems like you know, unnecessarily
expensive and hard work.
Expensive and hard work, and also because we were shooting in Boston, and I don't think there's a land. I mean, things had to be sent off, and
right.
And it would have been more expensive, anyways. But I did it. So I said to him, so what we're gonna do is with digital, we're gonna treat it like it's film, and we're just gonna have our custom film stock, and that's what we sort of made, and we really pretty much had one lot that we shot everything with. Then maybe sometimes I would shoot it with daylight balance, sometimes I would shoot it tungsten balance, but there wasn't a lot of sort of any tweaking at all. But it has been a while since I shot since I've done a movie on film, and I really want to do it again. And because of that thing where you sort of, I think is a good way of making you, much to what Hoyte was talking about, is to make you commit to saying, well, this scene should be lit from the outside, because obviously it's very different if you're, if things are lit from the outside as opposed to from the inside. I remember when I did The King way back in Texas with James Marsh, I had this idea of, because it's sort of the Gael Garcia Bernal is this ex-Marine who's sort of living pretty sort of rough life or whatever, and his dad, he's the illegitimate son of this Baptist minister who lives in Fort Worth or in Corpus Christi. And he obviously lives, and I remember back then, which was sort of, it's something I sort of always think about, is that I wanted all the lights in his world should come from inside the frame, really glow and have that contrast and fall off, and all the light was sort of, the illuminate him would come from inside, but whereas and feel sort of hot and intense and sort of glaring even at times, and then when we go to his father's place, everything was incidental. You don't really see the lights. Everything is a little more like a refrigerator. It's just which also sort of, and I just thought it made sense in so many ways. Also because it shows, one guy doesn't have AC and this other guy has it, but also that in Gail's world, everything is sort of, when the light is so close, it changes all the time. You're suddenly your front lit, your side lit, or whatever. As you move around, everything sort of changes. In the refrigerated world, everything is under control. Everything is measured. Everything is, predictable. Everything is, is the comforting life. And I mean, I think that's the way we should, with what we do, is that how we should think about light. Is this, do I want to shoot this room so it looks like a cave and it's just the light flushing in, or is this, is this room sort of lit from the inside and it's sort of its own thing? Is it, and then commit to it, and so I really want to sort of, and I think shooting on film sort of it doesn't have to be like that, because obviously it doesn't make you force you to think about light that way more than digital, but certainly on film, you can't just sort of look at a monitor and say, this is, what it's going to look like, because you could sit down at a monitor and then just start moving lights around and then, oh, that looks pleasing. But that's not really, it depends on what you're doing. But it has to come from sort of, a point of storytelling and sort of character and intention. And then to Hoyte's point, then there isn't any mistakes. I mean, it's like, then you're doing it right, and
yeah. So was the kind of on the more technical side, was the approach to just kind of only augment what was, so like just kind of one. I saw there's a photo of when they're sitting on the couches watching TV that I saw, like a publicity photo, and you just kind of have like maybe a sky panel or something in an octabox behind a lamp. Was the move kind of just to do like single source all over the place, like augment a window, augment a lamp, take it easy, or were you like hiding tubes everywhere?
I mean, I think at times we hit tubes, but all, because obviously when they're watching TV, there's sort of something we come back to a few times, and it's really sort of reflecting the state of their relationship. And so we talked a lot about it. Alexander had this idea that the first time that Paul comes in and sees her on the couch, she should really sort of be on a little island, sort of, just with the TV, and it should be her little world, sort of on an island in complete darkness. So that was the sort of initial idea. And at that point, we only just had a room full of sort of, it was a storage space or whatever, but that's how. And then we were like, oh, do we put it down here? Do we put it down here? Then then it's like, okay, it made sense to put it there. And then we were thinking, well, I mean, obviously there's that great thing. I think the TV is, because back in the day, obviously it was great with TV because they actually emitted a lot of light as well.
Right.
People didn't have that much light in their room. So back in, I mean, we've all seen it done really hoaxy and silly, but this was really sort of warranted. So we did the old sort of 2 bulbs in a box or whatever. Actually, we put tubes on the glass because we know we had to replace it, and they were sort of. So we thought we'd had that sort of code light because I knew they were both going to be looking at it. And in a way, it's like it was the house Alta, obviously, which the TV was back in the day. Because it was also the only screen that you had in your house. It's not like you had the screen in your hand and the room or whatever. And then it was thought very simply, well, but then there should be this sort of table light between them in a way, sort of unifying them and sort of. And then in the beginning, she's sort of further away from him. So we sort of designed it, because then the second time they were coming together, we thought of, well, then she's going to sit closer to him, and they're sort of going to be in the same light. So the first time, she's more in the sort of TV light, and he's close. So they're a little bit in different worlds, not quite in the same island. And then later on, they're unified, and then Dominique appears in the background, and so we gave him a little reading light, and so it was really sort of also working with obviously a lot with Ryan, the production designer, and the set deck department, and really sort of picking out, saying, we're going to need something to sort of help us back here, and that's where where everybody sort of has to sort of the same language, and that's something that Alexander is very good at, and everybody that worked on this film sort of had that sort of, okay, we're making a movie together. It's not like we're serving, one person or another person, or it's not there's no, everybody can bring ideas, and we looked at obviously endless practicals for all sorts of scenes, and then at times we got caught out and had to improvise or whatever, but that's a good example of and then when we shot it, it's sort of, obviously we had to help the light along a little bit, just to sort of reach, and that's where LED was very helpful, and obviously because it's small and it's sort of narrow at least, so you can really squeeze it into places. We'd had to do it with tungsten light. It would have taken forever. It would have been.
I imagine the like the classroom or like the hallway into or even the headmaster's room and stuff, because they were daylight. Was that pretty much just like leave the room as is, bring in a key, we're good here?
Yeah. We did push some light through the windows as well, and then just to balance it out, because there was so much snow around, and we were really lucky with snow, but also when we're inside, I mean, it really sort of was exploding at times. So we did push light through the windows, and then we just had a little bit of light inside just to sort of bring the key around a little bit, and because obviously we're shooting, it is a drama, but you really, you want to see their faces as well. And I mean, I didn't want to make it sort of overly dramatic, or in that sense, sort of, it's not sort of, I think going full Caravaggio would have been, would have been
much.
Exactly, too much. So it had to sort of feel a little sort of open, and so I guess that goes with the whole sort of, the sort of feeling of available light as well, that it's usually, you can shoot it for very moody, but we shot it for a little more sort of open and more approachable, I guess.
Well, and then I kind of left this towards the end because I figured it might be a slightly more in-depth thing, but obviously your colorist, Joe Gowler, made probably the most realistic film simulation I've ever seen, and part of that obviously has to do with the way you guys shot it. Even just using the H series, the Panavision H series lenses give the image that kind of nice. And plus, because you're shooting square, you got like the nice center bit, so it's not too fucky. You just got But I was wondering what in your mind makes kind of the Holdovers film emulation. First of all, like what went into it? Like what were the kind of criteria for making that image? But also what makes that image look so different from, let's say, the film emulation in the flashbacks in the machine, which kind of feels more like a representation of film and not necessarily a like true emulation.
It was with love. No, yeah. I mean, but I think just the lenses first. I like the H series because one of my worries, and I think for all of us, was that because if we didn't achieve the idea of making people actually, buy into the idea that it was made back then all of this stuff we would, then if we did it, it could very easily become sort of nostalgic or like we were shooting through, Vaseline or painty hose or whatever. Right? And that's really something that I didn't want. So I didn't want a lens that was that felt too old, like, oh, we do it, really pushing that. So I wanted something that definitely didn't sort of add to the sort of, oh, this is at arm's length or whatever, or we've been sentimental or nostalgic. But so those lenses were great. But then it was really, I mean, it took a long time to sort of to experiment basically because we tried all sorts of different grain. We tried to sort of shoot our own grain. We tried to sort of find grain online or lab has some grain. We ended up going with what I think is called live grain, and you basically buy a license. You have to pay for it, but the good thing is that it actually sort of is kind of intelligent because it's not sort of just over the full image. It actually shows up, in the highlights or the shadows more, and it's not like because we tried all different levels of grain, and then it very easily just becomes like something you superimpose over the whole image.
Right.
And also the trouble is when you sort of sit with it for a little bit, then your brain starts sort of actually sort of canceling it out, and then you're thinking, oh, where's all the grain? And then you put more grain in. You come in the day after, and you're like, oh, you're back to the whole.
Right.
So you really have to sort of look at it and go back and forth. But then we also did obviously halation to different degrees. We did gate weave. We did all those sort of classics things. But we also added obviously dirt, both neck dirt and positive dirt as well. Mm-hmm. We even thought about, which we actually did at one point, but we would do more. We would say, oh, this is the end of the reel, so we would have more dirt here. And then I'd even have the little mark for the projectionist. We tried it, and it just seemed like it was too much. So we ended up, but we did little chemical stains as well, like little, not bleach marks or whatever, but just sort of leftover chemical on certain frames. And then, so it was really, and we were doing this sort of as we were grading the movie, but we didn't end up, I think I spent 2 weeks on it. Then we had a break, I came back to it, and we did some more, and then we came back to it. And I mean, the beautiful thing about, because I know Joe, I've worked with him for many years now, and he's just, I mean, he has also done, I think, 4,000 Criterion sort of a restoration.
I was going to say, because I saw that, and I was going to say, you need to get me in touch with him, because this entire shelf behind me is Criterion's, and I would love to talk to him about the restoration process, because that's fucking fascinating.
I mean, you should, because obviously for some of it, all the filmmakers are long gone and, not here anymore. But for a lot of them, he would have, whatever, Robbie Muller or the directors, I mean, he's been, that would be a great podcast. You should, I'll text you his contact info, because that would be a great, he's a fascinating guy, and he's really a true artist himself, and he's very smart, and I mean, he's just, I love him to bits, but he's always also doing things behind sort of our backs, so he sort of builds all this stuff in, and then he doesn't tell us, and then we're like, oh, what happened here or whatever, and then he shows, and you're like, oh, that's really interesting, and you play around with it, and but it's definitely a process that you can't, you have to spend some time with it, and it's like a dish that you really have to keep sort of tasting and seasoning exactly, and then hopefully you just sort of, and then you have to go away from it and come back to it. So I just don't. It's not a dish that could be rushed in any ways, and you don't want to commit to anything too soon. And to be honest, it was. I mean, in the beginning, I was just thinking this is going to be terrible. I thought I was so kicking myself, thinking, oh, we should have shot it on film, but that would have been the same issue because we would have had to do all the same things that we did anyway. So but at least with the digital, we got a lot of the color in place because we had a lot of the tonality. We shot the whole thing on 1280, because in the beginning I also thought I'll shoot everything on 100 ASA because that's gonna force me to only shoot in the conditions that. And then very quickly I was like, reality check. That's really gonna, you're pouring lead all over everything now.
Yeah. Well, and you fuck your highlights.
Well, but because actually pushing digital obviously is the opposite of film, is that you protect your highlights. And I think that would actually help us in a way, because then it's gonna make the image a little more noisy, and it's gonna put it more into a film curve. It's gonna take away from the bottom and add to the top. So and also thought, well, this is this is a freedom of technology. This is technology liberating me, not suffocating me.
Well, and like we were saying earlier about taking a 1970s approach with modern tools. I think you guys did a great job of finding all the things about a film print that remind us of film and are sort of nostalgic about it, but aren't beholden to it, because if you were to start putting in all that extra shit that technically would be in film, it would start to become pastiche. You're becoming a slave to the format instead of just letting the story speak through, the I hate to say filter, because that's not that phrase has bad connotations now, but you know what I mean, like the image. I don't know. You really balance that delicately in a way that's very.
But that's why I think it takes time. It does take time, because I think one of the problems is that obviously it's impossible to go back. I mean, it's a little bit like, I think it was the 16th chapel in the Peter's Church or whatever, where the Michelangelo paintings and people thought they were beautiful or whatever, and then they actually did a restoration of it, and they took away 100 years of dirt, and all of a sudden they were like really vivid colors or whatever, and people would be horrified, and they'll be like, oh, but that's actually how that was actually the masterpiece, everything. But people were thinking, they'd been misguided and thought all the dirt and the fading was so the point is how it isn't just one tool. You can't just sort of say we're going to do it exactly like it looked back then, because it's either going to be filtered through our brains or our memories, or through time as well. Because one thing that we did that Joe came up with was that he added like a print fade as well. So because film prints do turn a little sort of more yellow in the highlights as they sit in a can for 50 years. So I think. And obviously Alexander has an immense, I mean, he has a very deep knowledge of movies, and but I would also go and look. I mean, when we were shooting, I was staying in New York some of the time and going to Film Forum, and I saw what's it called, Carnage, Male Carnage or whatever, a 70s movie by the director who did, I'm fading now, who did. But anyways, it's God, I have to text it to you now.
Oh God, I googled male carnage and all I got was the comic book character. That's not gonna.
Carnal Knowledge, it's what it's called.
Oh, sure.
Exactly. Also with Jack Nicholson. This was a print restoration or whatever. Maybe I saw it at the but in the beginning I was thinking, oh, this almost doesn't, the same thing doesn't quite look sort of period enough. But back to the point is that it's really that, so you have to sort of keep tasting it and balancing it out and saying much like the whole sort of technology riff is that it can't seem too distant. Obviously, we can just make it sort of seem old, but we actually didn't want it to necessarily seem old. We just wanted it to sort of have the pen strokes of the brush that was used back then, and then obviously not have too much. When we have daylight scenes, we would tone the grain right down because you wouldn't have grain. When we were in the cinema, we really amped the grain up because I was like, well, this is a scene. We would have underexposed it 2 stops. We would have 3 stops. We would have pushed it 2 stops or whatever. So this would be really noisy and really coming at it from, again, much the same idea that you come from it you do it with your brain to begin with, and then you sort of use your eyes to sort of acknowledging that your eyes play tricks with you, but then it's that balance, that sort of communication between your brain and your eye and the tricks your both of them play with you, and then the most important thing is you always go back and think, what was the intention here, and then you stick with that.
Well, I will say one thing that you guys, I don't know if you or Alexander, I assume Alexander probably did, had a hand in, but so I like watching trailers in the cinema. I don't look them up online, but I like watching them in the theater. I get there, with enough time. But recently I've just been playing this game where it's the same beats. It's like that's what feels like AI to me, is the editing of trailers, where it's like the same. They find some older song, and then they remix it. Usually it's like a haunting vocal, and then it'll go boo boo boo, and then it'll do like the Inception bong at some point, and then and so me and my girlfriend were sitting in the Holdovers, and I saw like 6 of them, and every single time I go, there's the remix, there's the bong, there's and then the Holdovers trailer comes on, and both of us just stopped because that one, I think whoever was the trailer editor amped up the quote unquote oldness, because it feels like watching a trailer that was on a VHS tape, down to, I mean, obviously the presentation of it, but also like, just the old school way of like having a narrator talk about it and stuff like that. And the thing ends, and this was months ago, and I just look at her and go, oh, whatever that is, I want to see it,
Yeah. But that's the sort of the kid that, yeah, I mean, that's really Alexander's sort of dedication and sort of perseverance and also knowledge and not just sort of letting anything sort of slip in that sense. And obviously, because you get bored with that after a while, and you're just like, oh, let it just, but he really, he sticks with it. And yeah. And so that's the love again. It's just sort of that sort of utter commitment and not sort of, falling in love with yourself, but falling in love with the what you're sort of creating, in through hell and high water or whatever it takes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it. I think we've gone a little over, so that's a plenty long time. I very much appreciate you coming back and chatting with me, because both of these conversations have been amazing. So the next thing you come on, I can come right back.
I'll rush out and do something new, so we have an excuse to do it again.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Have a good day.
Take care, brother.
See you later.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. If you'd like to support the podcast personally, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and buying me a coffee there with the link to buy me a coffee. It's very much appreciated, but as always, thanks for listening.